And I'm back in the room. Okay. Need a clapperboard. I feel much better with a clapperboard. Okay, so I'm starting out in bridge just here. Last year I gave a talk about bridge. Any of you see the thing about bridge? Did it improve your life? It changes the life of most people. If you don't love bridge already, you should. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Some of the stuff you can do with bridge takes loads of the stress out of working. You can hang things over to other products inside of here and lots more. But that was last year and this is now. Okay, so I'll start off on here with probably one of the nice highlights from CC itself. I want to deal with that one first. So I'm actually looking for a particular folder in there. There we are. So this technology was announced at Creative Sneaks at Max 2011. Did any of you see that? Any of you see Weng and his demonstration on image stabilization? No? Where do you people live? Yeah? Cornwall? No? Okay, right. Nothing wrong with Cornwall. It's very nice. I'm quite remote. So this image here, I know it's a little bit dark, but you can see the functional parts of it. This image here was in focus, but what happened is at the time the exposure was made, the camera moves. Okay, so it was a sharp image, right, or would have been a sharp image if the camera had been stable, but the camera moved at that time. Okay, and so Adobe have for a number of years been working on is there a way we can try and fix that kind of technology? And with CC, it's actually come to market. Now for me, because I'm quite often wobbling around when I'm taking a camera, and that's a life choice, right? This will solve half of my archive film library from this. But so fixing something like this is a little bit difficult, but I just want you to check out this technology, especially if you've never seen it before. Prepare to be amazed. This is a filter, and it's a sharpening filter, and it's the shake reduction filter. Right, watch this, because it will draw a little blur kernel. That's doing that now, and bam. Whoa. How about that? Yeah. Okay, so you've got this area here. Now, the user-friendly name for this, you can't see it terribly well, but there's a slight ghost, a little grey ghost coming off of that. That's because what this clever algorithm is capable of doing is working out exactly where the camera moved at the time the exposure was taken. Right, so just based on various tiny differing values in the pixels just there. Its proper name is a blur kernel, but that isn't very marketing friendly, so they've dumbed it down a bit, right, to blur trace. Yeah, but that's good. But you're all clever people, so you could have done with kernel anyway, so that's just fine. But it does that. If you don't think it's done the right job, then you can move that kernel to somewhere else and it will reanalyze and do that. Or, right, because of the way light is collected through a lens, right? So we know how photography works, right? It's not magic. There's no one in there hurriedly going like that, right? Light is pulled into the lens and distorted through the glass as it goes through and ends up on the sensor. When you're pulling anything in onto something flat, part of that is going to be distortion, right? You can normally see that in a way of sort of yellow to blue and green to magenta fringing in the edges, called chromatic aberration, which is a nice quiz winner should that ever come up. It's never come up. I go to quizzes. No one's ever said, what is chromatic aberration? I am robbed of my moment. But so because it's being collected in that particular way, what you can do is you can go out to the edges and say, and analyze that. Okay, rendering coarse preview, rendering fine preview. How nice. What is the coarse preview? Does it swear at you? What it's basically saying on there at the moment is, I can't really find any shake there for you to deal with. Did you see the little hazard that popped up on top of it? But this does do a very good job, right, of fixing an awful lot of pictures. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Is there a way we can bring the lights down slightly at the front so we can see the screen?
There might be, but I don't know how to do it. No, try all of them. No. What could possibly happen? Yeah, let's try that. Oh, come on, I'll give it a go.
Try the one that's nearest to the front.
Let's see what that is. Let's put the light on. Oh, sorry, it's like being at the cinema. Hello, Jane. Hello. Is that better? I can see it now. I know what you're talking about. Fantastic. Do you want me to do it again? If I take the preview off, so here's the preview off. Just at the moment. In fact, if I just reset that completely, right, and now I'll turn the preview back on again. Boom. How about that? Yeah, so much better when you can see it. I think generally a good thing. So it doesn't fix absolutely everything, but it does fix an awful lot of things where it's so close to being good, but it's just that tiny little thing. Look, I take a lot of pictures like that where I sign it, probably like yourselves. You see something, you're not going out with a particularly planned shot, but you see something, and just as you grab it, someone elbows you, or there's a gust of wind or something like that. Just that bit of movement, you've got the great shot, and of course it never occurs again, does it? It's nothing that you can repeat. But there, that's how that. So that, for me, is worth an absolute fortune, because I have got loads and loads and loads of legacy files that will benefit from that. Okay, so some of the other things that have benefited from there. If I just go to Smart Sharpen just for a minute, I'm just going to use this here. Right now, in older versions of Photoshop, and I can launch such an older version here, so you can get a bit of a contrast on this. Right, that's unfortunately about as far back as it goes, unfortunately for me, is Photoshop CS6 on this particular machine. Right, but just grab a quick mouthful of water. Hold on a second. I've got quite a bit running now as well, and it's going to give me a warning about the video, but we'll just ignore that. So I'm going to open up exactly the same image inside of Photoshop CS6. Thank you. So I'll just come out to that one and this one. Right, so in and this isn't just CS6. This will work right the way back to CS3. What I'm going to show you just now. So when we are teaching people how to use the Smart Sharpen dialog in these things, right, you basically come out to that and choose Smart Sharpen from there. Right, what we do is we arrive at a thing. Generally, it's better. Let me just cancel out of that a second. Let me just dial this one up to 50% on here. So I'm just going to zoom in. Right, I'm gone to 50% because 100% shows me 1 pixel for 1 pixel. That's best possible view. 50% is those things divided exactly in half. So that's the next best view from there. The things where it says 33 point something, the screen itself is interpolating that information, so you're never really going to see it as clear as it's likely to be, right? So 50% for the background is kind of good, because when I go to the actual dialogue itself, okay, when I can hit the right menu, that you get 100% in here, 50% in the background, like so. So we use a system where we arrive at a thing of descending halves. So we kind of talk to, by the way, you never really want this thing on just here. You might think you're a more accurate kind of girl/guy, right? But you're probably not, because of the way this works on edge detection. And you can end up creating edges on edges. It works very, very well for landscapes, not too great for things where there's tons and tons of different edges. So on here I want to remove lens blur, because that's the thing that introduced it. Remember that when the light is collected, it actually comes into a set of light sensors that are tuned to particular frequencies of light, and then it ends up, all of that gets aggregated out to the pixel arrays that you view on here, right? So every single digital image can benefit from a bit of sharpening. It doesn't matter whether you're capturing it on your iPhone or on a £30,000 Hasselblad back, right? Everything could do with a bit of sharpening because of the difference between the way it's collected and the way it's used. And if you're going to print it, you tend to over sharpen it, because once it's finished being pixels, it's going to become dots. Do you see what I mean? So those processes need a bit of care at each stage. We're in the bit at the moment between the sensor and the digital world. If I was going to go on to print, which is where this is going to go, so print for generally about an A4 image, which is what most things capture at about these days, around about 240 ppi at about A4 dimensions. Some things a bit larger, right? But that's sort of where we are. I think a radius of about 4 is about all you really need for that. Okay, so I dial up a radius around 4, and that means it's got 4 pixels either side of every edge in there to do its loveliness. Okay, so I do that, and then what I say to people is, right, take that up to 500%. Right, 0% is nothing's happening, so the image was exactly as it was a moment ago, but 500% is as far as this can go. Obviously, too much. So I say, right, half of 500 is 250, so dial that down. Now, you'll see that I arrive at 250 about here. The reason that that arrives here and not here is because this is based on something called a bell curve. So it goes that way in mathematical terms, literally along and up like that. And Adobe engineers are great at what they do, but they're very, very literal with their dialogues, right? More on that in just a second. So 250 or thereabouts, I drag that down. I think, okay, that's still too much. So I drop that down to another descending half and take that down to maybe 125 in that sort of region. I'm not being too precious about it. You shouldn't be. Just take it and then pat it backwards and forwards. You get it. So I'm looking at that. That's a definite improvement in this particular instance. Not sure there if it's quite in that sort of region. So I'm just going to drop that down to another descending half there. So about sort of 75-ish, something in that sort of ballpark, 60, 65, 75. So I now know that it's somewhere between 65 and 125, right? In that sort of region. And so you can see that by going to the middle of that, so if I went up to there, which would be around about 90, yeah, I could have a look at that and then say, okay, it's somewhere between 60 and 90, and so drop that down. Can you see how I'm arriving at that sort of thing? Yeah. As you learn to do it, so I'm saying this is how we teach it, right? And that gives you some sort of logic to work to, right? But the thing is that as you start to do this day in, day out, you become attuned to it and you kind of know where to go in the first place anyway. But even if you don't, it's a really simple patting backwards and forwards type thing to arrive at it. Okay, all right with that? So that's what we teach people up to there. So we crank that up to 500 to start off with, right? And then pat it backwards and forwards. Let me just come out of that. And in fact, I don't think I need Photoshop CS6 anymore for that. And I'll go to it now in Photoshop CC. All right, so I'll go for the filter here and do Smart Sharpen from there. So the number one thing about this to start off with is, I didn't do it, I've gone and stayed again at 44 point whatever % in the background. Sorry. So enthusiastic about doing it. There you go. So I'll go to Sharpen and Smart Sharpen. So I've got my best of previews. The algorithms that drive these have been completely changed. Okay, they are very, very different, and I'll give you an indication of quite how different they are, right? Because if I crank this up to 500% just here, yeah, you'll see it's still not that bad. Yeah, okay, it's nowhere near, right, as exaggerated as it was in the previous version. So you're not seeing to the same degree the haloing around every single edge inside of there. Secondly, right, they've linearized, that's putting it in a line, right, the bell curve, right? So now it's more human on the side there. Same scheme as before, you can still pat backwards and forwards, but you can draw a little bit more mileage out of it. You would have never, you know, sort of ordinarily dreamed of pumping this up that far. But looking at it, yeah, it's not too bad, even with that at the moment. In fact, I'm going to leave that parked at that. Now, there is noise occurring inside of there. There's various bits of colour noise. I don't know how well that's coming across in the projection, but on my screen, I can see an awful lot of magenta and green occurring in there from that. And there's this new reduced noise slider, right, that you can do, and that mitigates that, takes that right down from there. In fact, on my screen, I would say about 90% of that, maybe slightly less, maybe slightly more, has completely disappeared. So completely new math underlying the way that works, and it's a really, really decent job they've done of it. They also made the dialogues look a lot better. And where they had panel menus, they now have gear flyouts. go to the gear fly out. That's a gear fly out. That's what that does. Right? If you want it to behave like the older version, because there are creative effects that you could achieve from that, you go to the gear fly out, okay, and then you can say use legacy from there. And if you're using legacy, then you can use that more accurate option too. This also filters down, so you can actually parameterize this to some extent between the shadows and the highlights. So you've got a lot more flexibility. It is actually more deserving of the word smart than maybe it was over the last couple of versions. I mean, originally it was very smart, then it became less smart, and now it's very smart all over again. So there we go. That's the journey of smartness within Smart Sharpened Edge. You like that? It's good, isn't it? Okay, so let's show you something else in there that has been changed. I'm just going to pop back out of here, and what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to actually get it to show me everything that's in all of these subfolders, because I, probably like yourselves, I'm a bit of a visual searcher, so I'm kind of looking for a certain file. I'm actually after this one, and I'm going to do you know, it's really bugging me that that doesn't have a shortcut for that, so I'm just going to very quickly assign one, because on my normal version I have a shortcut for just about everything. So I'm just copying the Photoshop defaults across into here. Oh, actually, that might be one there. I'm going to overwrite it anyway. So I mind you, that's a bad plan. I'll call it Tony Shorts 2. It's the sequel. There you go. So, and then I'm going to pop down into the image menu just there, and I'm going to go to duplicate, which is a bit further down. In there. Big old menu. There we go, duplicate, and I'm going to add a shortcut for that. Now, my favourite one is like the division thing, so I'm just going to do that. It tells me that that's going to be removed from Photoshop Help. I am a little bit beyond needing that most of the time, personally, right? So I'm kind of okay with letting that one go. Yeah. So I'm just going to just say okay to that. So now I've got a shortcut that I can use to quickly duplicate this image, which I'm going to do maybe 2 or 3 times on there. So I've got 3 little duplicates of that thing, and I'm just going to run a couple of things on here. So I'm going to upscale this image using the image size dialog, which is now much more friendly, right? So that in itself has also been changed. It has a gear fly out from there, okay, as well. And from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this back to the default, it already was, of earlier versions, which was bicubic smoother. Now that always sat previously down in the bottom of the dialog, and most people ignored it because they read all of the stuff that was up on the right hand side saying click here and do that and so on, and ignored the bit down at the bottom. Plus the word bicubic generally scares lots of people in the design world. I don't know what a bicubic anything is, and I'm not prepared to make myself familiar with one right now. Right, but it's just an algorithm for how it introduces new information. Right, just it's as simple as that. Right, so I'm just going to dial this one up to 300%, and I'm also going to double the pixel count in it to 300 ppi at the same time. So that's a fairly significant enlargement to that. So it's gone from 8.78 megabytes to 79 megs, right? So I'm introducing 71, just about 71 megabytes of extra information. I'm saying to Photoshop, conjure that up, right? So that's just fine, and this is using the early one from there, so I'm going to say okay with that, and that upscales that like so. Now the default math on there is probably not too bad. I'm going to switch to this one just here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go up 300% and up to 300 ppi just there, and this time I'm going to change the algorithm to preserve details just on there. Okay, so I changed that. This is a brand new algorithm for how it does it. Right, so that's my middle one in this particular case. Preserve that. You'll see it's taking a little bit longer, but it's having a bit more of a think, right, about how it conjures up that information. And then on my leftmost image, okay, I'm going to just run that one more time. I'm going to go up 300% and double the pixel count using preserved details, but I'm now going to bring in this reduced noise. So this is like backing it off just a little bit. It's saying, right, okay, do that, use your magic on that, and then bring it back just a touch. Yeah, do whatever you can with the new things that you've made. So if I go that like so, all right, then that again takes just a touch longer, I even get a little progress bar. Always wanted to open a pub called the Progress Bar with a sign that just goes blue across the front there. I'd love to do that. It would be a bad move for me, I'm telling you that now. But again, life choice, right? But yeah, but I would like to do that. So I'm going to go to the arrange menu here, and I'm going to choose 3 up verticales, like so. So now I've got that, and they're all matching the same zoom and location. So now I can kind of navigate these. I'm just going to engage the hand tool just here, and then I'm going to hold down the shift key so they all move at the same time. So that, right, so, and actually I want to zoom in on that just a little bit. Oh, actually I want to just come out just a tiny bit just there and tell all of those. That was clever, Anthony. Right, I'll just go back to that and say match all. So that will take me to the same location in there. Then I can do that. So this is the original version on the right hand side. So that's using the stuff from the older math in there. Well, the old way of working it, slightly newer math, but and it's done that. It does appear sharper in some places. What you can't probably make out on the projection that you're looking at is the amount of noise that's going on here, and there's some quite severe haloing going on in a couple of places just there. This one is the one in the middle with the newer math right on there. You can see that's better in a lot of places in terms of the edge haloing on there, and this is the last one. I perhaps didn't dial in enough noise reduction there, but that's still pretty good, I think. I'll just tell those to move. Let's have a look at a couple of other areas. I found a really good one the other day that kind of showed it very, very well. I think it was towards the top of the thing here. No, maybe not. I thought it was around about that sort of region. Oh, actually, yeah, those folds, you can see that pretty well in those folds. I don't know about you, I don't know how that comes across on the projection, but looking at those 3 things, I definitely feel that that's the more successful of those. You can see the noise inside of this one. Can you see what I'm indicating to you? Yeah, so you can see the noise inside of that one quite clearly, and that doesn't appear as beautiful just down there or in that one particularly, but this one kind of stabilizes a lot of that stuff. So to my mind, I think that one is the better out of the 3.
Yeah.
Well, remember, it's introduced a lot of information. Yeah, so basically 300. So even if I just doubled the pixel count in there, I would have introduced 3 more pixels around every pixel. I think that's about right.
But the 2 on the right preserved a sort of orange color, and the one on the left was.
Well, you say they've preserved a sort of orange color. They actually haven't. They've introduced an orange color to be perfectly accurate, right? Because a lot of those pixels that you're seeing around there, right, are in actual in the real world. Actually, a lot of them have been turned to magenta inside of there, right, or towards a magenta. So magenta very close to the yellow, yeah, makes it look more orangey. So actually, it's the other way around.
Okay,
yeah.
fair enough.
Though
So
this one is actually closer to the original, okay, than those 2 are. So, but the introduction of all those extra magenta-y pixels on there makes those 2 look more orangey. It's this one that's kind of backed that off. Does that make sense?
it does.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay. So, there we are. Let's just match all those things. There are other products that you can use for upsampling. On one software, do perfect resize, which blows this right out of the water, right? If I'm honest, right, it does. It blows it right out of the water. You can get enlargements up to 1600%, and they are fantastic, yeah, on there. But it's not in the product itself, right? And that's quite pricey, yeah, to buy that. If you're in the region where you can buy stuff, do it. I used to have a $5 grand Caldera system, which could take something the size of a large postage stamp up to A3 with hardly any loss in quality, but it was $5 grand, yeah, and it had to have its own dedicated system to work on. I hardly ever used it, yeah, so I ended up selling it for 1. Gutted idiot, right? Life choice. Right. but But what I'm saying is there are other things, but this one is inside the product. The message is they are addressing a need that you have, and they are working furiously on making something in product work better, right? So I know Ryan Hughes, who is the product manager for Photoshop, and he is absolutely committed to getting the best right for users. That's all he cares about. Adobe have announced a new pricing plan for single edition Photoshop. So if you are only interested in using Photoshop, you don't want all of the other Creative Cloud stuff, they have a solution for that. I don't know if the pricing for that has been announced. I know what it is, but if I daren't tell you in case I'm jumping the gun. But it's unbelievably reasonable actually. It's like the cost of a couple of coffees a month. Good coffees, right? But it's still a couple of but I'm not talking about ones out of a chip van on the side of the A41, but you know, that sort of thing. Anyway, I'm just going to close all of those and just say don't save any of that stuff. Right. So anyway, he and his team, they are probably the most user-focused team in the whole company. And given the range of products that Adobe have, that's saying something on there. Let's have something that's a bit cool on there. Where's my bridge? Yeah, take it to the bridge and use that one. So, almost all of the filters now can be applied to smart objects. So I'm just going to turn that into a smart object. The advantage of that being, of course, that I can do various things with it. It's a non-destructive way for me to work. If you're not working with smart objects already, wake up. Yeah, it's only your own time you're wasting. Yeah, if you're ending up going back to stuff or creating unnecessary layer hierarchies because you want to be safe about the pixels you've got there. You saw how quick it was for me to create a smart object on there, and now I can do everything I need to do for it without having to think, well, that's it, I've done that. If I want to go back, I've got to start all over again. Yeah, so I can't believe I still meet people who aren't using smart objects. Unreal. But so a lot of filters were locked off, but you'll notice now hardly anything. Lens blur isn't locked off because that works in a particular way, right? It is locked off, but you'll notice hardly anything inside of here is not available to a smart filter. Even the two filters that don't live in the filters menu over here in image and adjustment. These are filters over here, the little known factoid for you. Okay, so even those two things are still available to that. Do you use this one? No? Do you want to see what this one does? So if you're still staying on CS6 or CS5, you can use some of these things. Oh, actually, no, that's going to flatten on that one, so I won't do it. But I'll show you anyway. What the hell? Right, so I'll just do that. So this is how I can do HDR type effects, okay, on this image. So there are some presets here that you can use, but you can modulate all of these things the way you would with the HDR thingy. Can't remember the name of it. So it begins with an A, but anyway. Right, so you've got loads of things inside of that you can use from there to change the look of your photo, to make them look more edgy and so on. You can dial all you want inside of here. Various different presets for you to play with. And so you can do lots of stuff with that. That is actually locking off on that at the moment. It's not supposed to do that, but okay. I'll just return it to being a smart object from there and go on with the bit that I do want to go with, which is even the blur gallery introduced in Photoshop CS6, right, is now available to smart objects. So if, for example, I chose to do maybe like a tilt shift blur on here, right? So tilt shift blur, see it used an awful lot on things where they're trying to make a sort of an overhead bird's eye type shot, so everything looks kind of Toy Town. Yeah, that sort of thing, you know what I mean? So it looks like it's a little model made by people, and that's quite popular to do that sort of thing. You can do it with a lens add-on called Lens Baby as well. So that sort of adds that sort of bellows type functionality to an SLR. And the great thing in Photoshop is that, of course, I'm doing this to an image, but I could just as easily be doing it to a movie. Yeah, so Photoshop can do all of that as well, and to motion stuff. Photoshop being used increasingly in the motion picture industry, yeah, as are digital cameras, because DSLRs, unlike a big studio style camera in which you need a bit of room between yourself and the subject, you can actually have actors holding a DSLR to give some angles that were previously not possible. All right, those angles are mainly up the other actor's nostrils, right? But if you want that, that's fine. Yeah, so a lot of people doing that. I watched Ron Ronson talking about those things a little while ago. Right, so anyway, I digress. So I'm just going to bring that back down. So I'm going to actually bring the center of the blur back down to there, and then I'm going to kind of bring out this area. So this area, first area here between the center of the blur widget and this is the area where it's not going to apply. And then this is a transition between filter not applied at all and filter applied fully. And so you can see how I can space that out inside of there, and I can dial all of these things in. I can either use the widget, although cleverly I've gone and put the widget down at the bottom of the screen, or I can use the blur amount over here. So I can dial that in. Let's say I do that, and I also want to add in a bit of distortion into that as well. Right, loads of other little bits I can do, and I'll click OK. So CS6, that's a done deal. If I hadn't put it on a layer, the system I was describing earlier on, it's kind of done. But here, all I need to do, if I think, oh, do you know what, I overcooked that, I can just double click on it. I'm back into the blur gallery. I can make the changes I want to make from there. Click OK, right, and it's just like that. And I can keep on going backwards and forwards between those two things as much as I like, as long as it's a PSD. I work in a Creative Suite workflow, so very rarely do I use other file formats, and if I do, I'll just fire a copy out to whoever needs it. Right? Otherwise, just keep it like that. Even the stuff I do cross-media in terms of Dreamweaver, because Dreamweaver can cope with linked images, so you can bring in a Photoshop file, and it basically says, how do you want me to produce a web-ready file from that? But it's a sort of a dynamic link. If I come back and change the Photoshop file, Dreamweaver tells me that that's out of synchronization, right? And all I have to do is tell it to resynchronize, and it just creates a new image on the go. So I don't need to work in other formats an awful lot of the time. But if I did, then I could. The great other fantastic thing with smart objects, of course, is that they automatically have a layer mask attached to them. So if I went into that, if I maybe didn't want to see half of this just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'll go for my gradient tool here on my mask, and I'll just do this out to foreground to background and make my foreground black. So remember, on a mask, black conceals, white reveals, like a swimsuit. There you go. So sorry. And you can see how now where that is, you can see that the effect of that filter is not visible in that area, and I can model that as much as I like. Okay, and coupled with that, I can also change the way that some of the filters blend with the actual object and blend and interact with the object itself as well. So many options there. But now when in CC, that's on everything pretty much. Okay, so let's come out of that and back into here. Am I doing on time? I'm going to have to race up a bit for some of the things there. So, I'll show you the one that I think that is my personal favourite on here. For ages, and in my Bridge presentations, this was one of the things I talked about in Bridge, is that Camera Raw, right, designed to interpret the information that the sensor got inside the camera without any other intervention. So you can, it's like having a negative back in the old day, and you could print in various different ways from that negative. So you can't damage a RAW file only by deleting it on your file system. Nothing you can do inside of the RAW interpreter, that was the word I was looking for earlier, the HDR interpreter. None of the things you can do in there can damage it, because it's like a negative. You're just creating a print from it each time. But not everybody shoots in RAW. My iPhone doesn't shoot in RAW, for example, but sometimes I want to use some of the power of RAW on those file formats. And for ages, you've been able to do TIFFs and JPEGs in there just by right-clicking on it and choosing Open in Camera Raw, and it will allow you an awful lot of the functionality of Camera Raw, okay, to process your JPEG. Yeah, and a lot of the stuff in Camera Raw is much, much more powerful than that found natively in Photoshop. Well, to take that one step further on from there, I'm actually going to literally open up this JPEG inside of Photoshop. Right? Camera Raw is now available as a filter. As a filter, come on, yeah, right? So I can do that not just on an image, I could do it on a layer or on a part of a layer. Yeah, I can use all of the amazing processing power that Camera Raw has, okay, on my image here. So for example, if I wanted to warm this up a bit, okay, you can see I can punch that out like so, and then if I want to scale that back with a little bit of tint, right, or carry on with that, I can do that, right? So I'm just reinterpreting that image from there. If I think, okay, that's slightly under or slash overexposed, I can change the exposure. Of course, it's not using the actual camera information for that, it's just taking everything to 0. Make it more contrasty, right? Improve the intensity of the highlights inside of there, and do similar things with shadows and pure whites and pure blacks, right? What I should be doing at the same time, of course, is watching the histogram just to make sure I've got the best possible spread of information there, but that's for another day. Okay, but all of that clarity, which is like a localized form of sub-sharpening, which is awesome. Negative clarity makes things nice and soft. I don't know whether you can see that. Oh, you can, definitely. Or Haley, positive clarity, of course, the opposite way. So it's got a bit more HDR-like on the side there. Another great thing with Camera Raw, wish Photoshop did this, right? Double click on any Camera Raw slider and it automatically takes it back to neutral, right? All sliders inside of Camera Raw, by the way, you don't have to actually click on the slider to use them. You can use what I like to call stapler accident finger, okay, to make things work like that. Wherever you see stapler accident finger, you just work that like so. Vibrance, so this again is added as an adjustment in Photoshop, but here I've got it as a slider right from there. Lack of vibrance desaturates to some degree, quite an edgy look there. And of course you've got saturation, which is like vibrance's bigger, much more aggressive cousin. We've all got one of those, I'm sure. Then I've got all of these other tabs. So I've got parameterized curves inside there, so I can use that if I want to just improve like the highlights. I can push that up and maybe deepen the shadows just to make that a bit more contrast. You can do all of that. I can do sharpening inside of here. Sharpening here makes Photoshop look a wee bit silly sometimes, to be honest. And it's got methods here. So this is one of the hidden tools things that Oscar would have mentioned to you, is that the Alt key is the answer to a lot of things. Here in Camera Raw, if I use the Alt key, so if I want to know how much sharpening should I apply or what, right, I can use the Alt key here, and it takes color out of the equation. But by taking color out, I'm more focused on what is actually happening on the image just there. What sort of radius around that? How can I visualize what the radius is? If I hold down the Alt key, right, I can see exactly what the radius is. Can you see the halos appearing around the edges? So it's actually showing me just there. And how can I scale that off by the detail edges? It's the Alt key. Yeah, so I can do that. And then how can I mask that away? It's the Alt key. Yeah, that's quite nice. It's like an illustration. And so all of those things on it, all of that stuff I want to convert it to grayscale, high fidelity grayscale. I could do that from inside of here. I want my reds to be lighter. I want my blues to be darker, yeah, and so on. It's a completely different interpretation of that. Or I could just turn it off and just do that tonally via the colors. I want to do a bit of a split toning effect. Back when I was in a studio, which was a long time ago, there was a particular way of messing around with the tonality of transparencies, right? So there were two kinds of transparency at the time. I seem to remember they were E6 and C41, and if anybody goes back as far as that, back with me, yeah, then perhaps you could just remind me if that's not me or just my older mind playing tricks. I mean, was that right? So, and they had their own chemicals, right? C41 had its own chemicals, E6 had its own chemicals, and presumably by accident at some time, because photography then very, very expensive, because it kind of didn't have the resource that you have now to go back and go, oh, we'll just do that again. Processed the wrong thing in the wrong chemicals, and it did interesting stuff with the tones, and everybody loved it. And so you started deliberately cross-processing stuff, using the other chemicals on the other thing to do it, and changing the temperature of the developer.
If you push the exposure and cross-developed it,
you got really wild and cyanotype-like looking things. And you can do that in here, but it's absolutely chemical free. That's the other thing. The chemicals smelt like wee badly. You used to have to go to work and everything smelled like wee. It's horrible, right? But well, not everything, but everything down in the darkroom areas like wee wee. But apart from Rosie, who worked in my diary room, she smelled of flowers. Right, but anyway, that was another time. Right, so here you can see I can push up. I can say how I want to tone my shadows just here. So I want to make those sort of yellowy, and how I want to tone my highlights, and then how saturated do I want to make that. And you can see I'm just sort of kind of this is the worst one I've ever done. Right, but so I'm just going to mess that around. I'm going to make those more blue. I'm going to make those more yellow. I think that works better. There you go. Right, so you can see that. But I can change the tonality. I can do all of that stuff inside of there. I'm just going to reset this just here. Right, again, that's the Alt key. Yeah, hold down the Alt key. If it's got a cancel thing, cancel normally turns to reset inside of there. So loads and loads of extra tools on the top of here. Graduated filter. Right, what I'm going to do with this particular graduated filter is, right, I'm going to drop the exposure down -4 stops just there, and I'm going to click and drag like so. So where this begins and beyond, right, the exposure is down 4 stops, and it transitions out to it not being applied at all just there. Can you match those two things up? Right, so even that itself, that's changed the nature of that image, right, by doing that on there. If I bring that up to perhaps something a little bit more reasonable, and I could make that area more contrasty, for example. I'll put another one down here so I can add more, like so, and I could say, right, on this particular one, I want to get the exposure normal, but what I'd like to do maybe is add a bit of a tint to that, like so. So there you go, just a bit of a, maybe a greenish tint, just make that stuff like that. So you can see I can add those things together. If I want to make an adjustment to one, I click on it, make the adjustment. If I want to remove one, I click on it and delete it, like so. So it comes out. So all of that. The other thing about these, because of the way they work differently between Photoshop and Camera Raw. So if I applied, let's say I added a layer to do this sort of thing in Photoshop, I might use a neutral density gradient, okay, to darken the tones underneath. If I then added another one on top of that with the gradient going in the opposite direction, in Photoshop the corner would be black because of the way that they blend together between that. They're not aware of each other. Whereas in Camera Raw, right, they kind of are. Yeah, okay, and you see that they're working together. Yeah? They're sort of blending in this part here. It's not darkening out. If I bring the exposure down on there, can you see how that's a completely different thing occurring just there to there? So they do work. They are aware of each other and do work. In Camera Raw, whatever number it is now, can't remember, but the one that comes along with CC, there's also a radial version of that, which is really cool. Yeah? So there you've got the adjustment radiating outwards. Yeah? So it's whole big scope for things you can do with that. Camera Raw is brilliant, and you've got an adjustment brush. So if I wanted to paint in an adjustment around here, the adjustment I'm painting in at the moment is I've been sitting on the grass too long, right? But if I just switch to erase just there and just take out some of that, so you can see I can model this as much as I like. I've got a tablet in front of me and I'm using my fingers, for God's sake, right? So you can see I can do that and just model that up as much as I like. I'm in erase mode at the moment, so it's removing it. I'm going to switch back to add. Just on there and brush that in. So I can do whatever I need to do with that. If I want to add a new one, so I'm just going to add a new one on this side here. I want to do something to sort of model this out maybe a little bit, maybe increase the highlights. Now I'm doing this to a greater degree than is really necessary, obviously, so you can see it on the projection. I'm going to switch to erase. I also want to kind of change the feathering for my brushes there, make it a little bit softer, yeah, and just dial that out. So, see how easy that is? So just bring that across, and even my mind's not matching up the fact that I'm actually doing this as a filter. Yeah? It's something that's been applied to that. And if I'd have had the presence of mind to turn that into a smart object in the first place, which I didn't, but I was just so keen to show it to you. Right, that's working. So you can do that not just on an image, but on an actual layer. That for me well, it's worth the price of a new version. I just think it's fantastic. I can do that. Of course, I've not made the most attractive image just there, so I'm going to get rid of it really quickly. Okay. Actions are something that I run quite often. Okay, on my images. In fact, I build tons and tons of different actions in here and in Illustrator So I've got a few things that I use inside of there that do things, and this is a new kind of action here. So this action is a conditional action. Okay, there are two actions above it, so landscape copyright and portrait copyright. So if I open an image that is a portrait, I've got a particular way I would like the copyright mark to be added to it. Okay, and then if I open one that's landscape, I've got a different way that I want it to do that. Now I could write a JavaScript that analyzes the image and says, okay, if your width is greater than your height, then by extension you must be a landscape one, so run this action on it. If your height is greater than your width, then you must be a portrait image, so run this action on it. Not everybody does JavaScript, right? And not in Photoshop. With using the extend script toolkit, so that's kind of away from them. I'll show you something on that in just a second. But conditional actions, this is an if action just here, and this says if the current document is landscape, then run the landscape copyright watermark on it. Otherwise, it must be, by extension, a portrait one, so run the portrait thing on it. Yeah, it's a small thing, saves you absolutely tons of time. You've got all of these different conditions that you can use to evaluate, right? Huge scope. Yeah, actions are the way that you earn real money in image processing, because if you're taking in bunches of stuff and even doing things like this, or even if you're doing it just to protect yourself, saves you the time from having to get involved in doing that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come out of that and I'm going to actually run that as a batch process. Now inside of here, I'm just going to set that back to being that. I've got this conditional actions folder here in which I have a conditional start thing that contains two portrait images and two landscape images. They look like they're having loads of fun, right? From there, and then I've got a conditional done folder which just needs clearing out. So let me just get rid of that one. Yes, I do. Excellent. Okay, so that's now empty. Naughty Tony for not emptying it last time. Actually, if I wanted to, I could start that action running from in here, right? But I'm just going to go back to Photoshop and I'm going to go to the File menu and down to Automate. I'm going to say Batch Process. Right, so this gives me this, and I say, right, okay, from the set copyright watermark, right, these are different sets I've got here, I want you to run the if copyright watermark action, and the source is going to be this thing here, conditional start, and then where I want them to go to is conditional done. Obviously, I've done this more than once, right, so those things were pre-populated. Here's one I baked earlier. Okay, right, and then is there anything I want to do to the file? No, I don't. So I'm just going to click OK, and that then just starts running because I'm already in Yo Sushi having my lunch. Right, well that's doing it. I'm charging for this, of course. Right, and my minimum billable segment is an hour, so it doesn't matter if it takes it 59 minutes or 10. Right, it's all good money to me. So, and if you're not working on a similar model, tut tut tut, you won't own a Bentley, right? Not that you'd want one anyway, right? And you can see now that if I go back into here, there's the copyright watermark on the top left as I wanted for my portrait images, and on the bottom left for, it's not a very nice copyright watermark, but that doesn't matter, right? It's down on the bottom left in my landscape images just there, and all done without me intervening with it, okay? Because I'm running low on time, I'm just going to pop back into that. Let me just see if there's anything else I particularly want to show you inside of there. Now you can pretty much, yeah, it doesn't. It just you just specify where the position is when you create the first action. Yeah, so you just basically park that and say where you want it in the first place. So yeah, you can have it wherever you want. Yeah, most of mine before this came along tended to bleed off the edges anyway, but I didn't do it on purpose. It's just that what I'd failed to do was run my script first to sort the landscape ones out from the portrait ones. I want to give you a tip, okay, that will work in any version of Photoshop over the last sort of 6 or 7 years. And it's probably, I wouldn't be surprised if you never ever visited, yeah, this part of Photoshop before, because it's got a scary word in it. If you go to the File menu, down here there's something called scripts. Would you be kind enough, please, to raise your hand if you've never ever used this thing before? Okay, as I suspected, right. So, do investigate some of the things that this has. There are loads of places you can get for scripts. I haven't got anything open on here at the moment that these will relate to. So some of these things, like flatten all my layer effects. Right? What you normally do otherwise is you introduce a transparent layer, just have that and the effect with the layers on it and merge those two things together. That's a massive waste of time to do that. Delete all empty layers. If I've got stuff that has moved between them, remove them. Yeah. Export my layers to files. Use that one all the time. Create a load of interface components in Illustrator, of course. Create a load of interface components now in Photoshop, and then just say bring those out so they're all separate files, and it generates each one as its own file. Very, very useful thing in there. Also great for teaching. Thank you. And all of those things. It's this one that I want to draw your attention to, because I am a big advocate of telling people who come on our courses, don't work on JPEGs, okay? Because if you do, and you do anything significant to them, right, and resave them, you are reapplying the JPEG algorithm, which is destructive, right? It achieves what it does by throwing data away. It's great for devices because it means they can store more images on that device, right? Because it does give you a fantastically small file, but you don't want to degrade it any further, right? So I say convert everything to a PSD if you're in a Creative Suite workflow, because that's the one that's most useful to you. But people say to me, but Tony, I get hundreds of images, right? How can I do this? I'd spend half my day doing that. No, you wouldn't. You use the image processor that Dr. Russell Brown gave us from here, right? Very, very simple thing. Select the images to process, choose a folder, right? So you choose the one that has all of your JPEGs in it, okay? Choose where you want them to go. I never do that one, save in same location. Recipe for disaster therein lies. I choose select folder from that and then click on that one just there to choose where they're going to go. Then I turn that one off and say save it as a PSD and maximize compatibility. I know you'll see an awful lot of tutorials on things like lynda.com and other things like that where it says, oh, you don't need maximized compatibility. That's because the person who's delivering that training is a subject matter expert in that one thing only. Yeah. For anybody else that works across the complete range of products, this is an absolute godsend, right? Because it means that programs like Dreamweaver, Illustrator, Flash, and InDesign have access to the InDesign layer architecture, right? Which means you can create different versions of something within one Photoshop or Illustrator file, bring them into InDesign, and then turn the layers on and off as you want without having a version of my cat in a window with red overlay, my cat in a window with blue overlay, my cat just in a window littering up your hard drive. I don't even own a cat, yeah? So I don't know what that's about. But do turn that on, right? And then you just, and if you wanted to assert your copyright on it, you could actually put your copyright info in there or run an action on them at the same time. Then you just click run and join me in Yo Sushi, where we'll chat more and have a great time. But for now, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed that.